Perhaps one of the most honoring questions that someone can ask you is, tell me your story. We're used to asking each other another question. I think at this point I've probably developed a bit of a reputation around this as a pet peeve, that question, how are you? Which usually is not interested in how you are. It's just a polite form of social greeting that acknowledges your presence. But if somebody says, tell me your story, that is a question that says, I want to know you. I want to know how you came to this place. I want to know what formed you. I want to know where you've been. I want to know what's important in your life, the people, the experiences that you've had. Tell me your story. And perhaps one response could be, you want the short version or the long version? Because to really tell somebody our story is an act of love. And for someone to ask is similarly an act of love. And so then you have to decide, where do I begin? Do I begin chronologically? Do I begin with some anecdote that is central to my identity, that's not necessarily the earliest calendar part of the story, but is a central core experience or relationship that has brought me to this place, that has shaped me in who I am? And at this time of December, we in the church are in preparation mode. We reflected on this last Sunday. We're continuing in this season of preparation called Advent, meaning a new beginning. And the beginning of the story that most readily comes to mind is the beginning of the story from the Gospels of Luke and Matthew. That is the birth story. And we're going to tell that story when we get to Christmas. But you have just heard the beginning of the story in the Gospel of Mark, which mentions nothing about Jesus' birth. If you said to Mark, tell me his story, the story starts with an entirely different character. It starts with a prophecy, and it starts then with a relative of Jesus, but not Jesus himself. A relative named John the Baptizer coming, and as we become familiar with in the season of Advent, using the language, prepare the way. This is the beginning of the story that we are invited to reflect upon in this second Sunday of Advent. And why should Mark choose to make this the beginning if somebody asked him to tell the story of Jesus? What we have heard in this retelling was John's invitation to people out into a desolate place. So already there's a surprise. Don't come to the temple in Jerusalem, but come out into the desert. We don't know a whole lot about desert here. It's nice and green. This afternoon, the plants are going to be especially happy. They're going to get more water. That's not common in the desert. But John the Baptizer says, come out into this place, in my imagination, where there is a minimum of distractions, where things are stark and simple, where the contemplation of the presence of God can be particularly poignant. And we're going to engage in what would later come to be called, in the Christian tradition, a sacrament. At the time, in Jewish practice, baptism was this ritual act of cleansing. It was in a way a new beginning. And we have taken on that same significance as followers of Christ, celebrating baptism in a way as a new beginning. And so John says, come out into this desolate place, this simple place free of distractions, this place where we can do this thing that is about turning our attention to the purity and the holiness of God. prepare the way. And so that we can get ourselves oriented in the direction of expectation of God's presence among us. Emmanuel, the Lord with us. And they celebrated this baptism. And one of the characteristics of baptism was cleansing from sin, clearing out the stuff that was clutter and obstacle and barrier to right relationship with God. And then, and only then, could the story make its beginning. Only when the people were taken out of their normal context, put in a place set apart, having mind and heart turned in a particular direction intentionally towards God, only then could the story begin. Reflect in your own life. If somebody said, "Tell me your story," have you ever had times like that? In Christianity, perhaps one of the most ready examples that comes to mind of doing that intentionally is called going on retreat. And individuals will choose, if they so have the luxury of time and the resources, to be able to go to a place set apart, to be able to change the rhythm of their life, and to be able to point it in a particular direction intentionally. That is a great blessing. Not all of us have that luxury of taking the gift of retreat. But when it does happen, it is, in a way, following in the footsteps of John the Baptist's invitation. Come to this place set apart. Come to this wilderness place. Be baptized. Make a new beginning. It's powerful to go on retreat. Even if it's not a formal retreat at a retreat center and a retreat location with a retreat agenda. I wonder if you've ever had a time in your life, if you were telling your story, that you reflect back on and you say, that is a time when I made a turn. That is a time when I shifted my focus, my attention, my priorities, my expectations and vision for the future. That was a turning point. And perhaps even God was in the midst of it. John the Baptist offered the people who went out to that place just such a turning point. And can you imagine what it would have been like for those people who came back to the normal rhythm of life and encountered the people who had not gone out and tried to explain to them what had happened? You may have had this experience of going and having a profound and moving experience, and then coming to the people that you knew, the relationships, and saying, "You're never going to believe this. Let me tell you about what happened." And at some point in that retelling, the thought occurs, whether you said it out loud or not, you just had to be there. The words can't replicate what just happened. You had to be there. This is the beginning of the story in the Gospel of Mark. It's not the birth of a baby in a manger. It's not shepherds. It's not angels. It's not all of the things that we associate from Luke and Matthew. It's instead an entirely different perspective on what it means to make a new beginning. And in Christian experience, in the journey of faith, we have, we hope, profound turnings and transformations. And then we have lesser, perhaps even more ordinary turnings and transformations. And that's what the invitation of Advent is. Maybe you're not going to go on retreat between now and December 25th. Does that mean that it is impossible for you to be able to turn your attention in a particular way, to be able to orient your hopes and expectations in an intentional way that is aligned with the presence of Christ? It does not mean that that is impossible for you. Because sometimes the shift that accompanies being taken into a place set apart is not a geographical shift, but it's an internal shift. It's a spiritual decision, intention that we decide to make, in which we are going to point our lives in the direction of the presence of God and then look and listen closely to see what happens. Tell me your story. It's the narrative of the things that we have seen, the things that we have heard, the things that have made an impression upon us, the things that we say, I will remember that for the rest of my life. And so the great gift of the rhythm of the church year is that it comes around again, and it meets us in the place where we are. Last Advent, what was on your mind, what was on your heart, is not the same as what is right now. But what is the same is the continual invitation from God. Turn your heart towards me. Prepare the way for my life and my love in your life. Let us make the story of your life and the story of the life of Christ meet and become one. And then, for us, the followers of Jesus in this present day, the inheritors of the legacy of the life of Christ and the stories of the Gospels in all of the different ways in which they make entree into the divine narrative, we write the current chapter of the story of God's presence in the world. It is a living story. It is a story of ongoing encounter, and we hope to be blessed in transformation. The first 8 verses that we have heard from the Gospel of Mark are a beginning. They are an opening. They are a beckoning once again to take up the invitation, to not be among those who, when John said, come on out into the wilderness, I've got something planned for you. I can't really describe it to you, but just trust me, it's going to be good. You'll be glad that you were there. To not say, oh, I'm too busy. I got to run to the grocery store. I got to go pick up the dry cleaning. I got to get my oil changed. I got to do this, I do that. Can I watch it later on Zoom? Will there be a recording of what happened? It won't be the same. You had to be there. And Advent season each year is our invitation to be there. So let us make this ancient story once again renewed as a part of our own story, turning our attention and our lives so that we can be fully present and be receptive to the many ways in which the story of God being alive and present among us is poignant and life-changing. In these remaining 2 weeks of Advent time, may you not be too busy to be there, so that you can be the one who is sharing the story with others. It was amazing. It was like a retreat. It was like this time set apart and different. And I know that God is present with me, and that God's love for me is strong, and that my desire to be in love with God in return is also renewed and strong. Amen.